Very pleased to be hosting the first UVM Field Herpetology career panel tonight. I'm not under any false pretenses. I know all 37 of you are not going to go on to be herpetologists, but I know that many of you are looking into careers in ecology, and I think that our panelists can speak to herpetology careers, but also to ecology, natural resource careers more broadly. And they represent kind of a range of different career paths, state and federal government, not the nonprofit world, and these folks are involved to varying degrees in education, outreach, and research. So I'm very excited to have Melissa, Kylie, Jill, and Luke with us today to answer our questions. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over and ask each panelist to just give a brief introduction, who you are, what your pronouns are, and then a little bit, this is like a 2-minute introduction, so a little bit about your journey and where you are now, what your position is. Take it away, Melissa.
Joys of having a last name that starts with an A. Always good to go first.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm Melissa. The pronouns I use are she, her. And yeah, to keep it abbreviated because I'm old, so it's been a long journey. I went into natural resources, wildlife biology as an undergrad. Was originally actually kind of thinking about doing something with birds because I got distracted by birds when I was an older teenager in early 20s. And then I came out to Arizona to work with the California Condor Reintroduction Project and saw my first rattlesnake. And that just brought me like right back into reptiles and specifically snakes, which had been my first love as a child. So when I moved out to Arizona to the Southwest for good, I got a job working in the field, conservation of reptiles and amphibians, worked on several different conservation projects looking at the effects of fire and urban development on herpetofauna, but there was always a pretty strong focus on rattlesnakes. Just that was the guy I worked for. That was what his specialty was, and that was what drew me to that program. So as I was working on these jobs and sort of thinking ahead, my initial sort of like wanting to do biology, animal work was like, you know, to help animals. I had been into them since I was a kid. And being out in the field was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it and have a curious mind and liked doing the science and being able to answer some of those questions I had. But on those conservation projects with snakes and specifically rattlesnakes, what I kept coming across, and my research partner who went on to found the nonprofit with me, we would interact with the public a lot because we were in public places, either a high-end golf course or a national park. And public's always very interested when you're out there swinging around science equipment like a radio telemetry antenna. They always want to know what that's all about. And they're very excited. And then we would tell them that we were working with rattlesnakes. And at best, you would get this apathy, like, who cares what this does or doesn't do to rattlesnakes? And at worst, and probably more common, were people saying that, well, wouldn't that be good if the golf course chased all the rattlesnakes away, or if fire, like, you know, made this habitat no longer suitable for them? You know, why would we want a dangerous animal like that someplace where there are also people, where I want to go, where I want to play golf or go hiking or whatever? And so as I started graduate school and, you know, was thinking about careers, you know, I kept remembering these interactions and just realized that there was a disconnect there between, you know, animals that needed some sort of conservation help. But if the public doesn't want to do that, if they're not interested in it, or if they actually want to like stop helping them because they really don't like them, then all that good data and science didn't really matter. And there wasn't an organization or a group like working on this issue at the time. So I decided to not continue on in academia, but instead my partner Jeff Smith and I decided to found this organization, Advocates for Snake Preservation, which is trying to bridge that gap and get people to understand that most of what they think they know about snakes are myths and they're not as dangerous as people think. You can totally live with them. And a lot of that we do based on some research that we did looking at things like parental care and social behavior. And we use those stories of individual snakes doing these things that people think are really cool and cute to get them to think about snakes a little bit differently and hopefully be more supportive of their conservation.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa. Kylie, do you want to go next? You're muted, Kylie.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, my dogs were barking and I know you didn't need to hear that and I forgot. So Kylie Briggs, he, him, I met a number of you the other day, but I'm the Northeast Turtle Conservation Coordinator for the Orion Society. And I'll just give you kind of the brief rundown of where I started and how I got here. So I grew up in the southern Champlain Valley of Vermont, and some of my earliest memories involve catching salamanders and snakes and things like that. And I had this, it could have almost been like a traumatic experience, but some of the neighbor kids I was hanging out with, we were just in the cow pastures behind my house, and we found a garter snake. And like their reaction immediately was just to go get some sticks and just smash it to death. And it was this like horrible, bloody experience. Like I ran away, not quite crying, but pretty close to it. I was like 5 years old, and a few hours later, curiosity got the best of me, and I just wanted to go and like look at the carnage. And I found these neonate young, like, I mean, they look like night crawlers almost, baby snakes writhing out of the body of this mother snake, and that kind of opened my eyes to, I don't know, I became really fascinated by what I'd seen, and I felt this urge to try to protect the snakes. So from that point forward, I would just try to find all the snakes I could around my neighbor's house and get them as far away from their house as possible. And that really kind of set me down this path of just like actively looking for snakes and other reptiles whenever I could. And at some point in elementary school, Jim Andrews, who runs the Vermont Reptile Amphibian Atlas, he took me under his wing and mentored me and steered me down toward a path of conservation biology. So I went to University of Vermont for my undergrad in the wildlife department. And as I was wrapping up the program there, I realized that I didn't really know what I was going to do with the rest of my life, let alone the rest of the year. Like I didn't have a job lined up. I hadn't applied for grad school. So I just hopped on the Texas A&M job board and Googled and searched for herpetology. And literally the first thing that came up was this posting from the University of Vermont for a mud puppy research assistantship and technician job. And the person who posted the job was someone I'd heard of but never really spoken to, and I was just like, there's no way that I'm not going to get this job, since their contact information is like right above me and I'm the only person here that seems to have an interest in amphibians. So I just went upstairs, introduced myself, and a few weeks later started a technician job, which I had for a couple years. That was with the Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit. I worked for Donna Parrish, and about a year and a half later is when I caught wind of the Orion Society, a nonprofit that works in reptile and amphibian conservation and monitoring. They were starting this timber rattlesnake research and conservation program in Vermont and needed a technician. So I applied for that. Thankfully, was granted the position. Did the timber rattlesnake thing for a couple years. And from that point, bounced around, moving back and forth between Vermont and Georgia, where the Orion Society is based. It was really convenient because the field season for timber rattlesnakes, that's the summer in Vermont, it dovetailed almost perfectly with indigo snake season in the southeast, which is really sort of a winter field job, which is kind of hard to believe if you're from Vermont and thinking about snakes. So I did that for a while until eventually, somewhere around 2012, 2013, the funding just dried up for a little while. I had a hard time finding seasonal technician work with reptiles and amphibians. And I'd also, quite frankly, just gotten sick and tired of moving every 6 months to the other end of the country. So I started just working odd jobs here in Vermont. For a while, I was building and refinishing gymnasium floors, but I got real sick of that very fast. And that kind of motivated me to go back to school and get a master's degree. So from there, I moved down to Texas and did my master's thesis researching how Texas tortoises change their habitat use at sites with a lot of invasive grasses. Wrapped up with that and got back to Vermont as quickly as I could. And the timing, it seems like my life is just like a story of being in the right place and at the right time. When I moved back to Vermont, the Orion Society was in the process of ramping operations back up in the Northeast. And about a year after moving back to Vermont, I was hired as the Northeast Turtle Conservation Coordinator, which is the job I have now. So I'm no longer a technician. It's actually like a permanent full-time salaried job, which is really what I needed. And my role now, which I think I told many of you about at least a little bit the other day, is really focused around wood turtle research and conservation and trying to find creative conservation strategies to restore habitat for wood turtles at the sites that are most important to them. And using conservation methods that the landowners and in particular farmers can be happy with and that are a good match for their properties. So that's where I'm at now. I'm not focused just on wood turtles. There's some other things we're working on, but that's really been the main focus for the last few years.
Thanks, Kylie. And now I will turn it over to Jill.
Hello. So I'm Jill. Try and keep this short. My pronouns are she, her. So I'm a wildlife biologist for the Northeast Amphibian Research and Monitoring Initiative, which is a program under the agency USGS. So after my undergrad, I did probably a similar program to what you guys are in, except at UNH. I did a couple years of just, field jobs. I did what I think Kylie said with just like scrolling Texas A&M like all day and just apply. I sent out a lot of applications, like hundreds. I still have them on my folders. And so I ended up doing the longest position I did was with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then through that, I met my current boss, Evan Grant, because we were cooperating on some vernal pool monitoring projects. And then he happened to need a master's student at the time. And that was kind of what I was looking for. I felt like that was the next step for me. So I did that. And my thesis was on redback salamanders. And then when I was finishing up, a position happened to open up. So I got lucky and I'm still here. But one important thing I should mention that I skipped over is that between my 2 years of grad school, I did a fellowship for with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service called Directorate Fellows Program. And that gave me special hiring privileges, along with another thing I did, a USGS Pathways internship. So those are really good and they're open to undergrads. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Jill. And to Luke.
Hi, folks. I'm Luke. I use pronouns he, him. I was born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, southeastern Pennsylvania, sort of west of Philadelphia, an hour and a half. Some of my earliest memories of herps were like Kylie's, not positive things. I had neighbors who killed rat snakes. I was in scouts. Frogs, toads being, bad stuff. So those are some of my earliest memories, probably subconsciously may have driven what I'm doing now. But I started off as a business major. I went to King's College in Pennsylvania. Sometime in my sophomore year, this environmental studies degree program opened up. I wasn't thinking future at that time, but that program fit me. I swapped, graduated. I worked in a consulting engineering, geotechnical engineering firm for a few years, and most of what I did was field work related to landfill expansions, gas station remediation projects, things like that. Not what I wanted to do, but at the same time, my last 6 months in that job, I was opened up to the world of wildlife. I got to assist with some timber rattlesnake surveys, some Indiana bat surveys. I was like, this is a no-brainer. This is where I needed to be. So I I quit. I went back to Penn State and got another bachelor's. This time it was a bachelor's of science in wildlife fisheries science. Much better suited. During those years, I did the tech jobs for a while. My first job was with the program that Jill works with now. It was with the Amphibian Research Monitoring Initiative in Glacier, Montana. I helped conduct amphibian surveys in the backcountry, and that was my first paid amphibian job, and I was hooked. So after that, I did a master's out at Humboldt State in Northern California. Immediately after that, I turned that into a PhD at the University of Maine. I studied wood frog, spotted salamander habitat use stuff during the winter, summer, and all the life history periods in the alpine and subalpine ecoregions in Maine. Me and my wife, my partner, we moved down to North Carolina for a job for her. I finished up. South wasn't for us. We were ready to get back north. We moved to Minnesota, and I worked for the Minnesota DNR there as a non-game specialist. So herps were a big part of what I did, but also did invertebrate surveys, bird surveys. It was pretty far-ranging, which was neat. And but couldn't wait to get back to the Northeast. So when the Vermont job opened up, I applied and was hired. And I should say that I'm a herpetologist with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife, but that's just part of what I do. A big part of what I do. It's a small department. We all wear many hats. So a big part of my time is land management at the dozens of wildlife management areas in the Rutland District, which is Rutland and Bennington County. So contracting, road improvements, timber sales, marking boundaries. It's a lot of what I do, not just exciting herp stuff, but that's my story.
All right, thanks everyone. Okay, so students, now that we know the panelists a bit better, feel free to put questions in the chat. They can be general questions that anyone could chime in and answer, or if you have a question specific to any of the panelists, you can just note that as well. So one of the questions that's come in is, and some of you have hit on this, so I'll just let you self-select who feels compelled to chime in. How did location play a role in your career paths? Did you choose where you live based on wildlife biology, or do you feel like you could have found related job experience anywhere?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. So I'm from Massachusetts, and I'm like, that's where I am now. I'm in Western Massachusetts, but I grew up in Eastern Massachusetts. And for me, people always told me, you know, you can never pick where you're going to work. And I think to some degree that's true, but you have to sort of take, especially in the beginning, just take opportunities where they come. But I was able to find something in New England, which was what I wanted. And so I was happy about that.
Yeah.
I'll jump in.
Luke, you go first.
All right. I wish I read this blog post years ago, back when I was job hunting, and I wish I remember who wrote it so I could give him credit. But this woman said after grad school or after school, you could look for location, job satisfaction, or salary, and you're lucky to meet one. And that's, I felt lucky. I got a job I liked in Minnesota. It wasn't where I wanted to be. It wasn't exactly doing what I wanted to do, but it was, I lived in St. Paul, so it paid pretty well. But if I wanted to stay around southeastern Pennsylvania, I think I would have had a hard time staying in this field. So I know that's not everybody's route, but for me, I think part of the reason I was able to get a job in the profession I wanted to do was because I was flexible and able to move around and take opportunities as they presented themselves. That's mine.
I'll just briefly add that, I mean, I grew up in Vermont, like I said, and I had this feeling that I belonged here. This is where I wanted to be, but I think it was very important to have some work experience in other parts of the country, Georgia and deep South Texas. And living and working in those places, not that those are the only two places people can go. It kind of reaffirmed for me that the Northeast is where I wanted to be, and at least at that point in time, there wasn't really anybody else in Vermont anyway interested in doing herp work, and there was like only one herp job in the state at the time. So it was just like one of those, if the shoe fits sort of things, and it did. But I think today it'd be a lot harder. That the state in the last 5 years has seemed to fill up with more herpetologists. I think, well, just generally speaking, there's more interest in herp conservation and herp research across the board. And in Vermont, even though this is a place that doesn't have a lot of herps, there are people now that want to work here and do that kind of work in a place that doesn't have much diversity. So it's hasn't gotten any easier, and I think I just got in at just in the nick of time.
Yeah, I think when I was thinking more academic track, like wanted to be a professor and have my own research program, it definitely seemed like I would just have to go wherever the jobs were. And that was true somewhat with graduate school as well, trying to find a good fit with a mentor who was interested and able to have students doing the kind of project I wanted to do. I ended up back where I wanted to be in Arizona. I'm originally from Kentucky, but after my first time in the southwestern US, like I knew that was where I needed to be, like this is home, and have mostly been able to stay here since then. But when I was doing I kind of skipped over the bouncing around as a technician during the latter part of my undergraduate, and before I started grad school, I had to go to California for a while, which was, not the worst, but not, wasn't of my choosing. I didn't get to work with rattlesnakes for a couple of years, so that was kind of a bummer. But yeah, so it's definitely a mix, and certainly unlike what Kylie was just saying about Vermont, at least originally, in Arizona, everybody comes to Arizona to do reptile stuff, even though it's not the most diverse place in the country. Especially for people who are into rattlesnakes, like that's the place to go. And it's very competitive to get even a seasonal like herp job for pay in Arizona, because there's so many people wanting to do especially snake and turtle or tortoise stuff. So that's, yeah, definitely something to consider. I mean, now since I created my own organization, or we created our own organization and job, like I can take it wherever I want, but that wouldn't have been the case, I think, if I had stayed in academic stuff.
Thanks, everybody. And I forgot, I was going to have the students on mute, so that credit for that question goes to Quillen. And I'm curious, Jasper, if you would be willing to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, sure. One question I have for potentially anyone, but most in particular, I guess, would be like, what's a good way to go about helping people to warm up to less popular animals? Like, I'm really enthusiastic about spiders, for example, among a lot of other reviled animals, but it just kind of gets tiring hearing about like how spiders should die, or how much people hate them every single time they're brought up in conversation. So like, and it sounds like herpetologists get some of that as well, depending on the species they're focusing on. So do you have any kind of techniques to help with that?
Yeah, I do, and I totally get that. It's very hard, and there's, some days I handle it better than others, but certainly, especially when in-person events were a thing, and I'm out at some festival, and people come up and I have to sit there and smile and nod as they're telling me about, every harmless snake that showed up in their yard, and they bashed it to death, because public safety. And it's tough, but of course, smiling is the first step to try to to get that to change. Because if I reacted the way I'm reacting on the inside, which is I would like to, bash their kid's head in or whatever, or at least like smile and tell them a story about that. That's not good activism. So we've kind of landed on this based on some experience, and also at looking at how people do outreach on behalf of other humans, not just unlikable animals, and so think of that. So we try to humanize and make likable snakes, and you can do this with spiders too. There's actually a couple like excellent video examples of this with spiders that are better than anything I've seen with snakes. But, you know, you get taught a lot in school, especially the further you go along, about anthropomorphism and how bad that is, and it's evil, and, you know, you shouldn't do that. But there's actually like a lot of debate on whether that's just a valid way to think at all, because we're humans. We can only see the world through human eyes. The idea of being unbiased is not a thing. And there's a way to be critically anthropomorphic, and that, you know, we choose to highlight things that snakes or spiders in your case share with people that people like. So I know there are a lot of spiders that, you know, they also care for their babies, and caring for their babies is something that is appealing to a wide swath of people. People think that's really cute. You know, Mother's Day, how huge is that? Everybody loves mommies taking care of their babies. And so we'll focus on behaviors like that are not scary, and that are appealing. And we also do a lot of storytelling. So instead of doing facts and figures about how beneficial snakes are, I'll focus more on telling you about Sigma, who is this young mother rattlesnake whose family got attacked by a squirrel. And like, we have a video of that, and I can tell that story, and you can pretty quickly like get people cheering against this cute furry squirrel and for rattlesnakes, which at the beginning, like, they were all, ew, yuck. So things like, so storytelling's good, focusing on things that people like, and you kind of have to fill out your audience a little bit with this, or just pick generally likable things. Like the parental care is just, that's such an easy one. And we also use names whenever possible, and don't refer to animals as it, because that's othering them and putting them in this box over here. And so the closer we can make people feel to snakes, or what other animal you're talking on behalf of, the more we can get them to empathize with them, the better. And so, yeah, it may not be the best like hardcore science thing, but in this regard, like, that's not my point. I can use scientific facts, but I can present them in a way that are going to make people feel warm and fuzzy, which is more likely to get them to care about something, and to then, you know, vote with their dollars or their voice and their support for, you know, whatever, or just not step on every spider that they see.
Yeah, so I agree with that. If you sort of just come from a place of trying to be tolerant, even though, you know, they're really intolerant of the thing that you care about, that's helpful. But then also, I think what's really helpful in my experience is to talk about ecosystem services. So, you know, for I guess us doing frog research, it's easy to be like, oh, well, they eat a lot of mosquitoes. And I know that doesn't help whoever is doing mosquito research, but it helps us. And so just try and find something in common with them. I think of at my wedding, our friend Riley, who's a bat biologist, was seated next to some family of mine that has no interest in the outdoors or ecology or anything. And every time I see them now, they talk to me about how bats eat mosquitoes. And so that was a big thing for them, where they would have been scared of bats before.
Can I add one very quick thing? So this, I do this with children. I've never tried it with adults. I don't know if it would actually work. But you know how kids always ask their parents why, and then the parent tries to answer the question, and the kid asks again, like, okay, well, why? And like, they keep going down that rabbit hole until the parent has no idea what the actual explanation is. You can play that with kids. Like, a lot of times kids will say, ew, snakes are gross, or ew, spiders are gross. And you say, okay, well, why are spiders gross, or why are snakes gross? Well, they don't have any legs, or they're creepy, or they have too many legs. Okay, so why does having too many legs make the spider gross? And like, you just keep going down that path. And by the time you get to like the third why, the kid has no idea why they don't like spiders or why they don't like snakes. And I've seen them have this kind of like moment of realization of like, oh, well, I guess they're okay then.
Nice. Yeah, thank you all. We last week we had a guest, Kristen Stanford, came to talk about the Lake Erie water snake. So we got to hear a little bit about that story, and about the process of, you know, trying to change the tide of the community, and their feelings toward the snake. So this is a really nice extension of that conversation. To change gears and talk about applying for jobs, Lena, do you want to pose your question?
Sure, yeah. I just kind of had like a general question / anxiety question about like job searching, like if there are any other job boards to keep an eye on, and just kind of managing sending out a lot of applications. My only experience with this really was applying for programs for this upcoming summer, and I think I sent out like maybe 15, and it was like one of the most exhausting things. So yeah, I was just curious about kind of managing that aspect.
And maybe those of you that are also now on the hiring side of the table, you know, you could add to this, like what makes an application stand out when you're hiring someone for a field position or any position.
Jump in. When I was doing my hiring or my application stint after grad school, I kept a pretty nerdy, but I kept an Excel sheet of all the jobs I applied for with the links and the contacts and things like that, just because that's how my brain works. But one thing I tried to do, at least for the jobs I was most interested in or thought I had the best shot at getting, was to reach out and actually contact somebody, not necessarily the HR, depending on the job, not the HR representative, but the supervisor. Sort of, I did that with my current job. You can ask questions about the job. You can, you know, maybe see what exactly it is they are looking for. You can establish a relationship with that person ahead of time. So I think that's valuable if the supervisor is willing to engage. And I'm not hiring right now, but I think I would appreciate that as a supervisor going into it. I think I'd find that valuable. Yeah, and I would also say don't only rely on Texas A&M and things. If you're reading papers and you're really into research that somebody's doing at a specific lab, you know, reaching out to that person and say, hey, I love this work that you're doing, you know, sprinkle in some citations of themselves, and you know, that's another way to make contacts and get into grad school or find a job.
We academics love to have our egos stroked a little bit.
Yes.
Jill, I know you've done some hiring recently. I'm curious whether you have any take-home messages from the hiring front about what can help someone stand out. You know, maybe the answer is just experience, but sometimes it seems, you know, like a vicious cycle. It's hard to get experience without having experience. So any other tidbits would be welcome.
Yeah, so that's something we really tried to be better about this year. You know, it's hard to take on people that don't have a lot of field experience because sometimes they are unfamiliar with the like nature of the work and they, you know, they don't want to deal with bugs or something like that. But so we tried to be better about that this year, and I think we were. I think the point is just to get across that you're passionate about it somehow. So for example, we hired someone with a background in conservation medicine, which is something not any of us really understood, but it was clear that she was passionate about disease ecology and was interested in getting field research. And so so a cover letter, I feel like are really important. Everyone has different hiring preferences, but I really like reading people's cover letters. And if they come across as passionate, then we put them in the priority pile.
And personal, so it's clear that like the cover letter was written for this job, not just the one that I'm sending out to everyone. I've mostly only been sort of like marginally done, like never in charge of hiring, but just in previous, because I don't have any staff, but just, you know, helping and reviewing for like other people that I was going to work with, and that always seemed to make a big difference when it was just, you know, clear that, you know, they were interested enough in this position to like take the time to write a unique sounding cover letter like for that position, and maybe even tweaking their resume too. That's a little bit harder to tell than it is from the letter. And what Luke said, the last time that I did like apply for a competitive position, I had been following the organization for a while because it was a nonprofit, and they had an office local to where I lived, and so I would go to their events and like made contacts with people, not who did hiring, but just so I got a little bit of some inside information on the job and the kind of stuff they were looking for. So when they did have something available, I think that certainly helped.
Excellent. Thank you.
If I can add one thing, Brittany,
Sure.
I applied to a lot of federal jobs in the past. I never heard back from any. So just an FYI, if you're applying through USA Jobs, don't take it personal if you don't hear back. Even if you think you're well qualified for a specific job, for whatever reason, you just don't hear back. So.
Yeah, so I'll add something to that. That's why it's really important to look into these programs while you're in undergrad, these internships, like director fellowship program and things like that, because you automatically get put ahead of everyone else on USA Jobs. So those are, if you guys can apply to those, they provide a lot of benefits.
Yeah, and the federal job I had, I know that the people who came after me this way too, I think they must have advertised on the TAMU board, because I think that's where everybody looks even 10 years ago. And they would advertise there, get the people they wanted, then they would put it on USA Jobs. And so you'd have to go through the official thing. But by the time it was on USA Jobs, they had already picked their people. Probably not the only one doing that way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, sorry. You can tell sometimes on this US Jobs the application question or the ranking questions that they know who they want to hire. Like there'll be these weird questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much experience do you have using elastic polymer injections to do mark recapture studies of incredibly small endangered salamanders? Well, like I know one person who can answer 10, and that's the person that you've already picked.
Generally,
last year.
If the application period is like 2 weeks, I think that's the minimum. So that's usually when they already have someone picked.
Yep.
Good point.
To know.
And keep your eyes open, because I don't know if I saw it this year, but typically we have Ken Sturm from Missisquoi come do a USA Jobs sort of how-to talk for the Rubenstein School. So there are some tips and tricks. You need to inflate your confidence a little bit on those scales Kylie's talking about. You want to be honest, but like your most confident, honest self instead of your least confident, honest self, because those things are used. And then, there are some other tips and tricks, like trying to use the language that appears in the advert in your application, because sometimes someone from HR is matching candidates' letters with the job ad, and they might not be in the field. So if they see, I don't know, led a team on your CV, and the ad is looking for project management, it might not be an initial connection to them. So kind of recycling some of those words is another good practice. You say, it's like a rubric, basically. Think of that advert as your rubric. And now your job is to show that you meet those parts of the rubric.
I think that applies outside of USA Jobs too. I've heard that for others, especially the bigger the organization or whatever it is, tend to do that kind of thing, like keyword searches.
Yeah. Okay, this is a great question from Nora. Nora, are you willing to unmute?
Sure. My Wi-Fi is kind of weird right now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I was wondering how important it is to get a master's program in order to earn a permanent job eventually in this field, and kind of going off of that, like what's the best way to go to grad school without having to pay for it, because it's just like I can't pay for more school after UVM. It's just ridiculous.
I'll jump in. I've had people ask me this. This is just my opinion. May not be everybody's, but I would not advise going to grad school and paying for it yourself. At Humboldt State, it's it's a small school. You know, master's level is the top. There's no PhD program there, and most of the people I knew were funding themselves through school, and it was taking 4, 5, 6 years for grad school. I have one friend who was doing bear research, putting on her credit card, and she graduated with tens and tens of $1,000s in debt, which is a hard way to approach the job market after grad school. If you're patient and you're, you do all the right things with the application, you treat it like a job, and you're flexible with location, hopefully you can get a master's assistantship or teaching assistantship, research or teaching assistantship. I don't know if it's necessary. It seems to be, a master's seems to be more and more necessary as you're applying for jobs, but coming in with a master's doesn't seem to be the only way to get into, say, a state agency. There's plenty of people that start out as a technician, build lots and lots of skills and experience in the field, and then move up to a biologist position. That happens here in Vermont. So if you're willing to come in as a technician level and work up, that's a possibility. I think coming in with a master's would maybe abbreviate that, but that's just my perspective. I will say I have a PhD, and it almost cost me the job I have now. So just don't think that increasing levels of education will better you off for a better job. It's not necessarily true.
A lot of employers are known for sending their employees to grad school so they can then come back and work for that organization at a higher level. I'm not speaking from personal experience. Maybe Jill could speak to this a little bit better, but like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for example, I know lots of people that have those permanent salaried positions with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they started as seasonal technicians, worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service for a couple of years, and then their bosses decided they wanted to keep them, sent them back to grad school, and then brought them back at a higher level, or just promoted within without sending them to school. So if you know that an employer has a history of elevating people and sending them back to school, that helps, because then you've got someone that's paying for you to go to school and probably paying you to paying your wage at the same time, which is super helpful.
Yeah, I'll add to what Luke said about I agree about trying to find something that is paid, not only because it makes it, you're not carrying debt for the rest of your life, but also because then that your advisor, people have a lot of problems with advisors sometimes about like getting them to, to like respond to their emails and stuff. But if your advisor has invested in you, like all this money and is paying you, then they're more likely to work with you better.
Great point.
Yeah, I mean, these jobs in general, let's be honest, do not pay well. So if you're starting one with a bunch of debt from grad school, my only friend that I know who paid her way through a master's project, she still has that debt. She's been out of school for like 15 years now and has been employed the whole time, but just cannot, because she just is, she makes enough to like pay her bills and not enough to like really get on top of that student debt. And so finding something where you can teach, or that they're hiring because they have some sort of grant to hire a grad student is key. Most of my graduate school was paid for by a National Science Foundation fellowship. They're not easy to get. They're competitive, but I think if you're interested in conservation, that, at least at the time, I mean, this has been, like I said, I'm old, so this was like 12 years ago, but no one applied for NSF fellowships for conservation stuff. It was all like, it was thought to be, this is just for hardcore, like basic science. So I think seeing something different was really refreshing to the committee and probably helped me get that. And you can totally use that for a master's degree, and you don't have to already be in a program. You have to know enough about what you want to do to like propose a project as part of the fellowship application. But that's definitely something to consider, because that opens a lot of opportunities if you come in with your own money like that, because it, is around, it's 3 full years of funding, like pays for your tuition, gives you money to do some research. I mean, they are nice, and a school that did not want me as a grad student when I applied initially. When I came back with an NSF, they were like, what lab would you like to be in?
That's all great input. And thanks for asking the question, Nora. I don't know where at UVM the right place is to give students information about grad school, but I've definitely found that, you know, we're so focused on getting you through your classes that then senior year rolls around, and we haven't really prepared you to think about grad school and like just, you know, talked about all the different types of programs there are, and yeah, just the idea that you can be paid. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and if anyone wants to chat one-on-one later and talk about grad school, we can definitely do that. I put in the chat the link to the NSF GRFP, which I think is probably the program that Melissa's talking about. So if you had a project idea and you wanted to write a proposal, then you could submit that. And as Melissa's saying, if you are funded, then all of a sudden your calls to professors you'd like to work with become a lot easier. For instance, if you wanted to come to UVM for a master's degree, I would have to have something like $80,000 to $90,000 in hand to support you through 2 years, to pay you a living stipend and to cover your health insurance and your tuition. If you have that money, then all of a sudden, you know, you can choose a lot easier where to go. And then I also just included the link on the Texas A&M page. There's a tab for graduate assistantships. So that's a good place to just kind of scope out what these postings look like, you know, what kind of skills they think are desirable, and you can start to figure out what the different kinds of salary setups are. You know, some will say stipend, some will say stipend and tuition waiver. You know, some may include health insurance. Some will say you're gonna teach some will say you won't. So this is a good way to kind of see the breadth of what is out there. Great. Okay. Kaylee, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi. I might rephrase this a tiny bit. I was kind of inspired by this from Jasper's question. Do you see a decent number of job openings, or like, do you see less competition for the job openings that are there for less charismatic taxa? Or do you see a big struggle to get people into that field since conservation dollars so often go towards charismatic species, or on the state level go towards like game species as opposed to non-game conservation? Just kind of what that environment looks like.
Charismatic to who? I feel like there's always, I mean, snakes and spiders turn a lot of people away, but then you've got a lot of people just clamoring to get those jobs. I don't want to throw a taxa under the bus or anything, but like if you wanted to do research with slugs or something, I don't see a lot of people, you know, getting in line for that. Slugs are actually easy. I have a friend that does like a lot of parasite research. Using slugs as like their main, you know, focus animal, just because permitting is really easy, and you don't need any sort of IACUC approval. I don't know if you've talked about IACUC in this class at all, but you know, if you're doing work with vertebrates, that can add this whole extra regulatory review process. But in insects and I say, yeah, non-charismatic or quote unquote, someone's gonna hate me for this, boring insects. I think those might be a little bit easier and have less competition, and also have a lot of room for additional research. Like the animals that people outright hate have this other group of people that like are basically fighting for those jobs and research positions.
I think there is probably still in general, I mean, I know this was the case before, and I've been out of the job market for a while, but there is less money. I mean, that was kind of part of, besides the like everyday people not liking snakes, but there's less money and less stuff done on them. And so that does trickle down to like fewer available jobs. But yeah, certainly like some higher competition, because those of us that are into it are really into it, and everybody's after that. I mean, it was I almost went back to working with birds just because it's like there's so many, at least seasonal jobs, like so many more bird jobs than there was for reptiles. So that is certainly something to consider. And I feel like with game species, there's probably even way more.
I will add one thing. As a state biologist, I am funded primarily through state wildlife grants, which are federal funds paid to each state to conserve these species that we call species of greatest conservation need. But I think this could be a really good time in the coming years, maybe, to be job searching, because there's a bill right now in the House. I think I don't know. I don't understand policy and legislation, but it's called Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And if it passes, it's going to be dedicated funds to all states for these species of greatest conservation need. So if it passes as is, it will provide money for animals and plant conservation. Give me a minute, please. And Vermont is scheduled to get about $11 million a year through that if it passes as it is. Which right now that's 10 to 15 times more than what we get right now. So that's $11 million for not game species, non-game species in Vermont annually, which is pretty amazing. That would fund a lot of great work, probably more positions. So, you know, I'm hopeful that it's going to be passed in this administration, and fingers crossed. So.
Awesome. Okay, of course, I came up with a few questions of my own. Now we're running a little low on time, so we're going to do a little question speed round. It's almost going to be like word association, just a couple sentence answers to a few of these questions. And I can kind of, I guess, call on you to just make that a little easier. What is one thing that surprises you about your current position? Maybe something you didn't expect when you started it. Kylie. Kylie, you muted.
Call someone else. Give me a second.
Hi.
Okay. Jill. Surprising things.
Sure. Well, I guess this less so when I got into my first job, but more so when I got into grad school. I wasn't expecting to have to learn how to code and like all these stats heavy things. It took me a while to accept that, but now I actually enjoy it. So I guess, yeah, just that's good to be prepared for.
Excellent.
I'm ready, but I don't know if we're
Go
doing
ahead.
the question now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it might sound silly, but it surprises me like how little most people know about wildlife, and especially like reptiles and amphibians. You get out of UVM, you've been doing this wildlife program, you're stuck in a bubble, like everybody loves wildlife, and then you get out into the public and like people don't know what a turtle is, and it's like it's the basic thing. It's just the gap is a lot bigger than you would have expected if you grow up just surrounded by people who share the same interests as you.
Thanks. Luke.
First thing that comes to my mind is how do you say it? Push-pull, animosity. I don't know. My experience with herps has always been a positive, friendly one. Everybody's been collaborative. You know, no issues. But there's a couple species in Vermont that just pit one group versus another. There's a mud puppy issue with fishermen and mud puppy folks. The rattlesnakes. I work with the timber rattlesnakes here. There's a group from out of state that, you know, there was issues with Vermont versus them for rattlesnake issues, and these are just things that I haven't experienced. So I was surprised by the, you know, the level
Polarization.
of polarization. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you.
Melissa.
I did not know that I would need to know so much about marketing, graphic design, and human psychology and behavior.
Awesome. Thank you. I wanted to ask, this doesn't necessarily have to be related to your profession. This could be like the human side of things, or it could be related. So the question is about stress. You know, jobs can be stressful. Working in the environmental sector can be stressful, especially with, you know, most of what we hear is bad news about biodiversity declines, global climate change, not enough funding to do the things we need to do, etc. So the question is, how do you manage your own stress and mental health? This could be like a deep strategy or just like tips and tricks for everyday living.
Yeah, so I am more stressed right now than I have been in my entire life, and I don't know if I'm the right person to be answering this question, but like I try to the greatest extent possible to have the weekend be the weekend, and that's really hard when you're doing field work, and it doesn't work all the time, but like, you know, 5 o'clock or whatever time it is on Friday rolls around, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to close my laptop, and I just need the next 2 days to recharge. And when it's not possible, like for example, I have to go to New York next weekend for this like fundraiser thing, and then I don't know, there's no way I can make up for that in the next 2 weeks without falling like way behind. So I know like 2 weeks from now, I'm gonna be like just about, I won't say, but it'll be a rough couple weeks, and that's just how my spring has been. But just save some time for yourself if it's even remotely possible.
Okay, Melissa.
Is weed legal in Vermont? I'm just kidding. Sort of.
It
is. I try to start each morning like my way and have like a series of things I do to kind of set a tone and intention for the day, and not immediately like go to my phone to see emails from people who want us to like jump on every cruel thing that happens to snakes that I can't just, you know, you always hear that advice about just, you know, don't look at that news story and don't read this and take a break from social media. And that's not possible when it's part of your job. So at least I try to start a day by, I've been reading up on Stoicism, which has been a very like calming thing to help me look at the world and try to react in a more intentional way to things, and some journaling and just like sitting out on my swing and look, we live at the edge of the Gila Wilderness, one of the biggest in the continental US. And so just being able to be outside and starting the day that way has been tremendously helpful, especially in the past year. And playing with my cat, who is a source of joy. I don't know what I would do without her.
Thank you. Luke, what ideas do you have, or what works for you?
So I alluded to it earlier, but one of my big things is just to make lists. If I can get them from my brain onto paper, that's just one less thing I have to think about memorizing them. So just, it's important for me just to get things on paper. That's step one. Step two is just prioritizing. You know, some of the things I want to spend my time on are the things that are probably fall to the bottom of the list. So recognizing that. And at least for me in my job, one of the things I'm working on, I'm getting there, but I can do better is, you know, I hate to say it because it's one of the things that brings me joy and relief stress is field work, but by finding ways to be more efficient and spend less time in the field gives me more time to do the stuff I need to do outside the field. So for my job, those are sort of the things I do. And you probably saw my son here. He was here. Those, for me, come 5 o'clock, they're dragging me away anyway. So it's a natural stress reliever for me. I have two young kids.
Thanks. And Jill?
Yeah, so this is something I think a lot about. It's important to me. Like, I've struggled with mental health issues, and I just became a peer support worker at our center. So it's something I'm trying to learn more about. What I'm encouraged by is that even since I graduated undergrad, which was 2014, people are open to having these conversations a lot more. Like, it has gotten a lot better. And so when someone asked about the, you know, applying to jobs in certain regions, I think it's okay even before you get a job to think about, like, am I okay with being here? You have to make priorities. If your career isn't as important as being somewhere, that's okay. That's fine. Just, you know, adjust your expectations, and then when you're in a job, just having really open communication. And sometimes scientists aren't very good communicators. And so just laying it out like really clear, like saying, I can't, like, this is not within my realm of possibilities is too much. And usually people will adjust.
Awesome. Great advice, everyone. Thank you. Okay, the final question. This can be very rapid fire. Want to end on a high note, of course. What is one of your favorite things about your career? Whoever feels compelled can jump in first.
I love when just like weird stuff happens, you know, like there's always, I don't know, one time I found a toad without a face and it was just like walking around. It must have, like, it was not going to live, but it was alive and it didn't have a face. And just, I love that stuff.
For me, it's been living in different places, working with species and communities I never would have otherwise worked in. And I've got this, not that I'm very good at maintaining relationships, but I got this network of friends across the country, which is pretty cool. So that's for me.
I love, especially when I'm working with private landowners and, you know, I'm in the field with someone who's spent almost their entire lives on a property or in an area, and being able to teach them or show them something that they never knew that they've been sharing this landscape with their entire lives. And then they have this sort of epiphany or this moment of bewilderment. You know, when I'm doing outreach to farmers, especially, and I'm talking about wood turtles, and I describe the animal, and I'm asking, hey, can I just do a turtle count on your river? What I hear a lot is something along the lines of, oh, well, you know, I've lived here for 55 years, and if there were orange-legged turtles on my farm, I'd know about it. And then 2 hours later, you know, the farmer's out there with me finding turtles like on their own, and they're just like in complete awe. Like, how did I miss this? And that turtle might have been older than the farmer and been there that whole time. And it's just seeing that moment of learning something new when they thought they were done learning new things about the place they've lived their entire lives. Like, that to me just is a really awesome experience. Even though it's actually their experience, I just like helped it happen.
So this is like actually kind of similar to Kylie's, and that getting to witness somebody else's experience, getting to be the one to give someone their first positive experience with a snake, whether that's a child or sometimes an adult, getting to meet our super friendly gopher snake Pipsqueak, who just everybody falls in love with. And, you know, sometimes it's as simple as that, but sometimes it's just in the form of sharing a story with someone about these behaviors that they had no idea that rattlesnakes do, and just getting to see that change in their expression when they're just considering this whole group of animals in a new way just is like, yeah, it's really special to see that. And I feel very privileged to get to be the one to do that.
Awesome. I think that's the high point to end this this panel and discussion on. So class, if you can help me by using all the fun Teams features to thank our guests for being here today. Thanks for making the time. I know it's a busy time of year for everybody. And thanks to the class for great questions too.